Okay, so let's switch into some English now. So, ladies and gentlemen, if there's one person who can embody the future of European media, it is our next speaker. He's got the wisdom, the insights, and let me tell you, if speed talking were an Olympic sport, he'd give Lasse Granqvist a run for his money. Get ready, buckle up. Please welcome on stage, Daniel Knapp.
Hello. Thank you so much for the warm introduction. And indeed, it is my third time in Sweden this year. I can barely believe it. But I think with so many of you, it really shows the dynamism of the programmatic and the digital advertising sector. In the next 15 minutes, I want to speak about the key forces shaping digital advertising and programmatic advertising globally and in Europe. And indeed, it's going to be a roller coaster. The average roller coaster ride probably is 2 minutes with ups and downs. This is going to be a 15-minute roller coaster, but I hope it's going to be equally scary and delightful in terms of adrenaline. I only have statistics to offer, not height differences or speed, but it's going to be a little story in 4 acts. We're going to speak about the state of the digital advertising market. Then we're going to delve into the mind of the marketer. What do marketers of the future really want from digital advertising? They're funding all of this. How's their logic changing? Then we're looking at how could the sell side adapt what is really required to cater to these demands. And then lastly, we're going to look at the changes in the programmatic world, which I think is a bit stuck between stasis and complacency and revolution, both things at the same time. So let's dive in. The state of the digital advertising market in Europe. And to continue the roller coaster metaphor, actually, if we look at the quarterly data for the last 2 years, it indeed does look like a roller coaster. Look behind me. Ups and downs, ups and downs. All quarters behave differently. It became quite difficult to plan ahead because every quarter was different. And I'm starting here on the very left in the maybe last normal quarter, Q1 2020. No pandemic, no poly-crisis, nothing of that sort, right? Then we move into the pandemic hits, panic, crisis budgeting, zero. We all got used to the pandemic and we said, okay, let's invest a little bit more, but only in short-term channels. And then all of a sudden, the whole narrative seemed to change. We were in the Zoom economy, in the SVOD economy, in the e-commerce economy, and we had this digital utopia. All our lives were going to be digital, and digital advertising was required to push these new e-commerce models, drive people to sign up to subscriptions, etc., etc. But that utopia was short-lived. We then moved into, well, the digital endemic collapse. All these small businesses that were riding the wave on just Google ads, Facebook ads, etc. Suddenly money got more expensive, and also there was war on the horizon. So complete change. Then we saw 2 kind of limbo quarters, which didn't really know where they were supposed to go. And then we saw an uptake. Advertisers embraced a must-spend dynamic. They realized we need to build brands to justify the price increases we've pushed through at the pandemic, and we need to become, in a sense, more competitive. We need to shore up our business against many new competitors coming into the market. And we see this dynamism in particular in markets which have strong kind of small businesses starting up. The birth-death rate. It's the sound. That is, the birth-death ratio of businesses is a very important predictor to see how much money is being spent. But you can see 2022 was a year that went down, and 2023 was a year that went up. And we believe that 2024 is going to continue the aggregate 2023 trajectory around 8.6% growth in Europe. Where does Sweden stand in this world? We can see this on this bubble chart here, which is always one of my favorites because it has so many different bits of information in here. The sizes of the bubble are the size of the market. The dotted lines are the averages in terms of ad spend per capita, so sign of how mature is the market, and then sign of growth, how vibrant is the market. Sweden is more mature than other European markets, spends more on digital advertising. It's a digital advertising first market. But it has lost some of its growth momentum compared to smaller markets that are kind of in the upper left here, but also when you look at the UK, for instance, which is a very large market, but still grows more than average. And I think some of the drivers here are really more about collaboration. How can we use better use of data, combining digital advertising, television, etc. One market that isn't on here is flying through the screen right now. That's Turkey. That was mainly pushed through inflation. So 70% inflation meant that the market skyrocketed to 100 and something percent. So let's disregard that and not compare ourselves with Turkey. Let's switch to a different bubble. Let's switch to the formats that are powering all of this. Here we can see the size of the different formats that are in our European ad spend study. How big were these markets and how fast did they grow in 2023? This is, of course, a snapshot. I think much more interesting is to look at the dynamism, the long-term view. And I started here pre-pandemic in 2019. How big was each bucket in 2019? And what was the growth trajectory? And I think there's some very interesting things here. The social market is right now as big as search was in 2019. And many of you in the audience here play in this left part of the screen. There are smaller bubbles in there, but there are bubbles that grow faster. So I think this is quite interesting for the future development of programmatic. One thing we have to bear in mind, though, please have a look at the yellow bubble, banner display advertising. That was Programmatic 101, selling squares on a page. There isn't much growth in there anymore. In fact, the market grew without adjusting for inflation by only 2.7%. This is not the future of programmatic. But look at all these other things, retail, audio, digital out of home, and I try to map a little bit over where the growth opportunities are and why they are there, right? Retail media, low penetration, it isn't really programmatic. I know it's just starting out in Sweden, but it's not really programmatic, but it's going to open up. Audio, I think particularly AI-driven creatives can become a real driver for programmatic. Non-social video, CTV, connecting video, upper funnel marketing with outcomes advertising, digital out of home in omni-channel, addressing kind of using new signals that are not person-based, but maybe kind of cohort or location-based. And then, of course, banner advertising, limited growth in that world. But marketers are not necessarily embracing those formats. They have particular priorities, and these priorities have changed. And now the screen is going to get very light again. And these are the priorities. What we did is, we're living in the age of AI, so we trained a large language model to run through thousands of earning call transcripts from advertisers, large companies. You see 8 of them behind me here, consumer packaged good companies. They talk a lot about advertising because it's often 20+% of their overall expenditure. So they have to justify to the public markets what they're doing. And here's some AI summaries of what they have been doing the last quarter. And I try to highlight the themes that they're looking at. Branding, digital, data targeting, AI, and outcomes. And those themes are recurring time and again of over the 1,000 companies that we're tracking. I think the really interesting thing here is that suddenly branding and digital and branding and targeting are not seen as exclusive or as separate pillars, but they're increasingly becoming interwoven. We can also see that the CMO metrics of clicks, views, like, or media metrics are increasingly being challenged, and the CFO or the COO is taking a closer rein on marketing. Outcomes. What does marketing deliver on the bottom or top line of business growth? These are all things that are happening in here, and AI has become a major tool of efficiency and control for these marketers. And many of us working for media owners are thinking, well, there isn't really that much growth in the market. But when you look at what these companies are investing here we can see their overall marketing expenditure growth. And then the average growth of their overall business, 4.6%, they're over-investing in marketing. So if we're not seeing that revenue, it means maybe the products aren't right, maybe we're in the wrong part of the market. Growth is there. And we can see how this growth, in a sense, shapes marketers' minds, or how marketers' minds and their growth shapes the overall market. Behind me, you see a comparison, 20-year difference. These are the top 25 marketers globally, according to Ad Age, in 2022, left. Here is the same list, screenshot from a paper, actually, in 2002. And only the dark blue ones on the left here were in the same list 20 years ago. If you look at the names here, you see Amazon, Alphabet, Temu, JD, Walmart, these are all advertisers that are using a very different logic in how they attribute media spend, what their KPIs are, where you have less kind of legacy structures in the marketing organization, and that is being reflected in what they want from marketing and how they do their budget allocation. And this means that marketers' strategies should influence what sellers are actually offering. And we're seeing globally a very interesting development. This is global advertising spend. The numbers don't really matter, just the proportions matter, right? We can see content media, so media that primarily produce editorial content. Television, let's say cinema in that, newspapers, magazines, radio, and so forth. There is, in aggregate, very little growth in that bucket. Yes, there's massive growth in CTV, but it's often substitutional to linear core businesses. A lot of the growth we're seeing is happening elsewhere. That doesn't mean that these media aren't important, but it means that it's often easier for marketers to find the metrics they want. Whether they're right or wrong is an entirely different question elsewhere, in particular in environments which are close to the consumer transaction. So, like our friend John Travolta, it's becoming increasingly difficult to find those elusive incremental budgets. So what needs to be done in order to tap into those? The CEO of one of the largest publishers in the US, Dr. Meredith, put it extremely bluntly at a conference. If you can't show performance, you're toast. Performance, again, is a very nuanced term. What is performance, really, right? It's not necessarily bottom-of-the-funnel marketing, but it means, look at what I said with the advertisers before, it's connecting to top and bottom-line business growth that becomes increasingly important. One thing that has jumped into that world is, of course, the world of retail media. And you've seen in the trade press many headlines like the ones behind me. Very, very bold predictions. Retail media are going to be bigger than TV in a couple of years, and those years are approaching quicker and quicker. Can that really be the case? Is that true? But we're seeing the switch, right? There was this symbiotic relationship between mass media and mass brands in the 1960s. They grew up together. Maybe there's now a rewiring of that relationship. And to illustrate it, let's go back in time to before I and before many of you were born, to the year of 1980. I barely scratched that. This is Germany. Linear television size over a very long time horizon. You saw this uptick in '87, where television, commercial television, really exploded. And we had around 14 years of growth until peak linear television in the year 2000, right? With a compound annual growth rate, average growth rate of 13%. We have, by the way, 7 years of retail media growth. I wanted to compare this, so I put a 7-year average behind that as well, and we had around a 20% growth rate. When many of us looking at retail media, including Amazon, eBay, etc., they're thinking, well, that's ridiculous, the growth rates we're seeing today. But if we put this in context, right, retail media, in a sense, is doing exactly what television did back then, in a similar market environment, adjusted for inflation. Very similar growth rates. So it's actually not unfeasible. So this is something that we're seeing, a rewiring of relationships. Outlook globally, we can see where is growth coming from. Data from Walk, across all different media. We can see in retail media growing the fastest, but interestingly followed by content editorial media, CTV, but the data-enabled version of that. And I think increasingly we shouldn't see, although many budgets are moving from linear TV into retail media, see those as competitors, but see in particular programmatic as a bridge to connect those two. Look at Walmart's acquisition of Vizio, look at the way that Amazon is going, etc. I think there's a lot of potential in that world here that programmatic can help with. But programmatic is really stuck between stasis and evolution, maintaining the status quo and milking it for as long as possible and completely rewiring the system. Sweden is kind of more advanced than other markets in terms of programmatic penetration. Here we're looking at what percentage of display advertising spend, including video, which potentially could be delivered programmatically, so excluding walled gardens, etc., is actually programmatic. It's 61% in Sweden. And we're seeing that ad tech in aggregate is quite healthy. Here's a composite growth of 14 ad tech companies. This is global, not Swedish data, and we're predicting kind of healthy double-digit revenue. Complexity and orchestration really favors ad tech players, and it's quite important. But the market is changing. We're seeing on the buy side an increasing concentration. More and more large players, independent players are kind of in that dark blue stuff. You can see how big Google used to be, but how big the Trade Desk, how big Amazon, etc. have become. This means it's becoming increasingly difficult for publishers to be listened to in the bid stream. And what they're doing often is the more the merrier. Here's an example of a publisher that I worked with, where I analyzed the data. What percentage of revenue comes through which DSP? And they're using 27 plus DSP, just in a sense to maximize the chances of one of those phoning home and getting through. And this means that we, in a sense, have still a pretty big supply chain mess and supply chain explosion. Here is an analysis of 20,000 publishers and the length of the ads text file, how crazy big that is, average 61. And we're still, despite all the differences in first-party data privacy, transacting predominantly in the old way, as you can see behind me here. This is data from agency data from advertisers spending 50 million plus on programmatic, many impressions still not delivered on first-party data, and those on third-party data often not cookieless. So for many of us, it means, oh, same old world of programmatic, not changing. But many things are happening. Despite, in a sense, what we saw in the sandbox, we're seeing sandbox adoption is, for instance, picking up. Here you can see the topics API calls by publisher. What percentage of publishers actually enable that? You saw two blips in that. One's third-party cookies delayed, and the second, actually, the de-deprecation, right? These two different things. But it's picking up again. At the same time, we're seeing structural transformation. We'll come to that right now in the Q&A with Daniel. This was a great quote, I think, from Kafka that really illustrates the DOJ trial we had in AdTech and Google recently. There are different ways of seeing the same world, and they're not necessarily wrong. Both can be right. Programmatic is changing rapidly, and that means in the future, those who own decisioning, those who have superiority of signals are going to win, right? Either through new bundlings on the DSP side or through the rise of sell-side curation. There's some risks for everyone of becoming dumb pipes or being disintermediated, of losing fees, and also losing control. This is even exacerbated now by many large players tapping into AI and decisioning. You can see all the different products here behind me. They're all called Plus something, by the way. It's interesting, right? Apart from PMax. PMax should have been called Max Plus or something like that. But they are closed loop, closed walled garden, so they can really use data to optimize. We need to integrate better in programmatic to replicate this. Many are building this, agencies. This is just a count of how often agencies in the earnings call mention AI to bring kind of programmatic to the next level. And we can see it also when we look at agency strategy. There's an example here, not an endorsement, but here, for instance, Publicis saying, hey, we need to change the model. We are now not an agency, but an intelligent system. We are looking at unique data at scale, historical data to learn, and we are also centralizing the business. So huge changes in here. And I think these are ways how we can break through the third-party cookie dependency in programmatic and really innovate. Not everything can be changed. I want to close with a quote from James Baldwin. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but we need to actually face it to change it. So we need to, I think, understand that we can't rest on our laurels. We need to push this market further to really unlock further value in programmatic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel. So, we also took the opportunity now to talk about the biggest drama of the ad tech industry of 2024. And that's obviously that Google is currently facing a major antitrust lawsuit in the US. Explain to me, as if I were a 4-year-old, what this is really about. Or let's put this way. If this was a Shakespeare play, who are the characters, what's the movie about, and what's the plot?
Well, no one got murdered yet. That's the good news. The plot is, there's, of course, Google on the one hand, there's the ad tech system, and maybe consumers on the other or in the middle, there's publishers somewhere, and there's a judge, an 80-year-old judge who is learning about header bidding. I think that's quite exceptional. So we had a trial started in September. It lasted 15 days, 3 weeks shorter than anticipated. Now we're waiting for kind of the closing statements on the 25th of November. Then there's going to be an appeals process, which could take a long time. Think of the Google Shopping case. Think of the IBM case in the, from 1969 to 1982, 13 years without resolution because the market had changed, etc. So we don't really know when this is going to end. It's a very long-winded process. And as I mentioned in my Kafka quote, the key thing is that different players are viewing what the relevant market is in very different ways. Right? Is the market and market concentration to be measured on the ad server, DSP, SSP level, or is it more that everything is an integrated value chain and you can't really separate all of those components? That's where lots of pro and con arguments are currently hinging on.
I see. Are we facing another Mark Zuckerberg moment where, Mr. Senator, we're running ads?
I think we're really past that. I think the trial, the evidence, the questions were quite profound. I think the challenge is really what are the potential outcomes of this? What's going to happen? First of all, we don't know the timeline. Some are saying, very simple, just remove a component, the ad server, AdX, etc. There's some interesting analysts who are saying, well, how about we do this all as a public benefit corporation, right? As a kind of public infrastructure, like gas, like water, like a utility that kind of runs on managing just the costs and gives the rest back to publishers, etc.
Like GCDCO in the out-of-home environment.
In a sense.
Yep.
And others are saying, well, you know what? Nothing is going to happen because once this is about the past, once this stuff is being resolved, the entire market will have shifted already. I'm more in the camp that nothing's going to happen, but that's just my personal opinion, and I think I'm probably as excited as everybody to see how this pans out. But I think there's one important message. That is, nobody in the programmatic world should rely on a regulator of changing or apparently fixing a market. Right? We are not in a position to wait and see. We have to innovate with partnerships, with first-party data, with new curation models, with coming up with great new signals and bundling them in new ways, of bridging retail media, CTV, etc. It would be wrong to wait for some kind of ruling to elevate the market.
So the message is, keep making active choices.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Daniel Knapp.
Thank you.
Big hand.